Hello, everybody, and welcome to this month's edition of the Watch Club. We're the monthly filmmaker interview series of the Newburyport Documentary Film Festival. I'm Program Director James Sullivan. We're brought to you, as always, by the Ford Hall Forum, which is the longest continuously operating public lecture series in the country. We thank them as always, and we thank you for watching and for your donations. Don't forget to subscribe and like our YouTube channel so that you get updates on our monthly interview series. And we are here today to speak with Liz Abzug, who is one of the two daughters of Bella Abzug, who is the subject of the film that we're here to talk about, which is Bella, ! This Woman's Place is in the House. The film just finished its open run on, it's part of the American Masters series on PBS. And PBS just closed the window literally, I think at midnight this past night on watching the film. So hopefully you've had a chance to watch it already. We'll find out from Liz where you can see it after the fact, but hopefully you have seen it. It's really a lot of fun. Film about Bella Abzug, of course, the great fiery congresswoman and outspoken woman leader from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. We're going to take a quick look at the trailer for those of you who haven't actually seen the film yet, and then we'll be right back with Liz Abzug.
Do you know me? Let's make this political power structure ours. It's because of the killing of the spirit and the meaning and the belief of American democracy that I do impeach the President of the United States.
When Bella first ran, it was considered such a unicorn event. There just weren't that many women running. She was blunt, she was candid, she was poking the beast.
You support Nixon's 31.
Walking in the street with Bella, people would be yelling, "Give him hell, Bella." If a doorman or a taxi driver said something she disagreed with, she would argue with him because she really cared.
I wanted her to get elected because we desperately needed her voice. So I went out with her on this truck.
That people have to live. People have a fundamental right to eat.
When she got to Washington, it was an explosion.
Are you suggesting to me that all of your files of the CIA are presently in the possession of the FBI?
I will refuse to have you say we are arbitrarily acting in this regard, Madam Chairman.
Also, for a lot of us women, most of our lives we were told to shut up and sit down. And it was very encouraging to be with a woman who was saying to us, "Speak up."
In another groundbreaking effort, she introduced the first national gay and lesbian rights bill. Bella was way ahead of the curve, and the rest of the world had to catch up.
I'm ready to go.
What's happening here? Are they, whoever they are they trying to do something to you?
Mrs. Abzug said her CIA file dated back to 1953 and included reports on her anti-war activities and Vietnamese contacts.
I'm here in the New York delegation with Bella Abzug and her famous hat. Do you ever take that on?
What a question.
I was bold because of Bella. Bella and those other Congress women, they spoke up, they spoke out, they organized, they challenged, and I felt capable to do that and a responsibility to do it.
There is not even one woman among the 100 U.S. senators.
She did like to be first, but I was afraid she would lose everything.
I don't remember Bella ever sharing doubts or concerns about anything. She would just say, "You gotta get in there and fight."
She knew that she wasn't there just for Bella and her generation, that she was there to make sure that the doors were open for what came next.
Liz Abzug is the executive producer of this highly spirited documentary about her mom. Liz, thank you so much for being here, and welcome to the Watch Club.
Thank you for having me.
So I knew some things about your mom. I was actually born in Queens, and my parents were very much New Yorkers, although I grew up in Boston, and we'll get to that because you have a Boston connection that I'll ask you about in a minute. But your mom, was so involved in so many things. I learned a lot from this documentary. I knew that she was obviously, the leading voice probably for the women's movement in the 70s. But she was very much outspoken on behalf of the LGBT community. the disabled community, and kind of the list goes on. And I loved all the moments in the film where she says, I think at one point she says something like, there's no such thing as isolated rights. Like, you don't just fight for one group's rights. That to me was one of the most powerful things I got out of this film. One thing I didn't know was that, correct me if I'm wrong, but if I got this right, she was behind the legislation that let the MS designation for a woman to be able to say, well, I'm not Miss and I'm not Mrs. I want to be Ms.
Exactly.
She was behind the legislation that designated, made that, a legal option on your driver's license or whatever.
Absolutely. She was.
How old were you and your sister Eve when all of this stuff was going on, and what was your impression of those changes that your mom was helping usher in?
Well, when she first was elected, I was 17. And actually the first person I got to vote for was my mother at 18.
Nice.
Which is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
My sister was 3 years older. She was already in college. It was like a mega world change for me, my sister, and my father. I mean, because she was so dynamic, because she was so articulate, because she was so strong as a woman and as a woman politician, she was covered very heavily. You're in media, and that made a big difference in our lives, in our families' lives.
Was it, sort of a mix of emotions? Was it like, geez, we're in the public eye, mom's in the public eye, people are saying mean things about her, all of that, right?
It was, look, it was great in many ways. I mean, we used to go to the theater here in New York, my family, and for instance, and we go into a Broadway, theater, and the audience would start applauding her just walking into the theater. And my sister, she's a little more quiet than me. She was pretty embarrassed about it, and, we didn't know quite in the beginning how to handle it. Then we're in a restaurant, always in restaurants, and they're always asking for her autograph, and interrupting. We got used to that. My father, all of us got used to that. It was a complete turnaround in terms of the way, we operate. But I was proud of her, as was my father, as was my sister, because we knew she was barrier breaking in so many areas of the law and in politics, like you saw in the trailer, that I was proud of it. Of course, I'm proud of her.
Yeah. Well, and did you understand the depth of all that other, like, of course, as her two daughters, I'm sure that you and Eve understood the depth of her commitment to the women's rights movement, but did you understand at the time the importance, the significance of all those other movements that she was doing? Or did you hear what I heard in the documentary, which is the whole thing about, like, you stand up for everybody. I stand up for people, she says,
I was very political active. I'm a lawyer by training, but at that time I was a major political activist here in New York myself, organizing the high school students against the war in Vietnam. I was a co-organizer, co-chair of that. And we grew up in our household where mom used to talk about her early cases, her civil rights and labor rights cases, early on, right out of law school. And then we featured one of them in the film, the famous Willie McGee case. So when you ask, the context was always a question of justice, civil rights, way back to my grandparents, her parents. And therefore, this is not, one thing built on the other.
Yeah.
As I tell people, her earliest case, the Willie McGee case, where, it was a very significant case, and she's right out of Columbia law, and she's going to the Deep South, to represent a Black man who was accused of raping a white woman he's having a consensual relationship with. Well, that case that she was on as the appeals defense lawyer for 4 years changed. In that case, that one case, it informed everything else that she did in her life professionally after that. One movement built on the other. You ask a good question, because truly the civil rights movement, the feminist movement, the gay rights movement, anti-nuclear war movement, the environmental movement, one movement builds.
They're not isolated. Right. Yeah. Do you, I just lost my train of thought because I had a great question for you, but I'll come back to it. Did you and your sister feel, this is what it was. Did you and your sister feel like to some extent, you talked about like the commotion around your mother, like she couldn't go out in public without getting, surrounded. And she clearly basked in that sunshine. But did you and your sister feel at all when you were growing up that, like, wow, we got a little bit ripped off from mom being home, because she wasn't home very often, I'm sure, right?
Well, yes, no. But she was always at significant events, all right? For us, me in school, my sister, I was, a singer, talent shows, and my sister was an artist. And the thing is, we shared her as we got older and she got more prominent, in the years that she was in Congress. Of course, we shared her with the country, with the world. We had to share her. My sister is a more reserved person, which an artist and a therapist, and more reserved, shyer than me. And so it was harder. My father also, very much a giant behind her, but was not, in many ways he was, he could be funny and he was out there, but a lot of ways he was not, So we shared Bella, my mom, with the world. It actually, not from pretty much the beginning, it was the country, but then international work later, last part of her life, we shared her in an international way.
Yeah. And you kind of knew that was part of the deal. The whole family sort of understood that was part of the deal.
Yeah.
I'm just going to say really quickly that if you're watching live and want to ask Liz a question, all you got to do is type it into the chat and I will pose it. So feel free to do that. There's your crawl suggesting that you do that. So we'll keep an eye out for that. Let us know where you're listening or tuning in from, and whether you've seen the film before. Liz, you mentioned your grandparents, and that Bella's activism goes back to them. How well did you know them? When did they live until, and what can you tell? I mean, I know some of this is addressed in the film, but what can you tell us about how they taught Bella how to live in the world and fight for justice?
Well, I didn't know my mother's father. He died when she was 13, but I knew my grandmother. She lived till I was in law school, till my third year in law school. They believed in social justice, that everybody should have a shot. Russian immigrants coming here, like many did, in the 20s and the 15s, 10s. And they instilled that into my mother and her sister, my aunt, very early on in their lives. And then my mother had a great-grandfather who was a very radical guy. She was raised, my mother, in the first several years, Orthodox Jew. But then when she turned 13 and her dad died, she wanted to say the prayer, for the Kaddish for her father. And they went to a synagogue where, as you know, Orthodox, the women and girls are put aside behind a curtain and the men are on the other side. Well, my grandfather encouraged her to come up to the front of the synagogue with all the old men and say the prayer, say the Kaddish for a year. And my mother often said that was the beginning of her feminism. Or in addition, she said she's a feminist from the day she was born. But that was a very pivotal moment. She's 13 years old when she did that.
Some of the congregation members, I'm sure, some of the male congregation members were probably not thrilled, right?
Oh, that's right. They weren't. No, they were not thrilled.
Well, your mom was such a, obviously such a delightful person. And so it just brings a smile to your face. But one of the funniest things I think about the documentary is that and a lot of it is right there in the trailer, like just how uncomfortable and annoyed, and the word annoying comes up quite a bit. All these male politicians of that era were like, God, I have to deal with her, and she ate that up, didn't she? I mean, George Bush, rolling his eyes basically at her,
Yeah, that's a funny story. After many years after, I was on a plane coming from Washington, going back to New York. I worked for Governor Cuomo, #1, as a chief lobbyist in Washington. And George Sr. and I were on the same plane, and he sat down across from me, actually. And it was great, this little conversation I had with him. But one of the things he said is, I'll never forget when I had to testify before her in, the government operations committee that she chaired when I was CIA director. You saw that in the film. He says, I'll never forget it. Never forget it.
Did you introduce yourself right away? I'm Liz. I'm
Bella.
Bella.
It's a whole story. I sort of looked at him and I said, oh my God, he was on a private plane. I mean, he was on a commercial plane. And sitting across from me. And you have to remember, this was a time he, was really bad on AIDS and AIDS support.
Yeah.
And as a gay woman, I was like, oh my God, am I going to start, telling him, what the heck are you doing? Or am I going to be diplomatic? Right. So I, got it in my head. Plus, I was the senior person for for Governor Cuomo. So I had some things out of straddle. But after I figured it out how I was going to approach it, I introduced myself and I told them I was, Bella's daughter, and that, I worked for Governor Merrick Cuomo, and that, my mother got a kick out of him for sure, and which she did, prosecuting him in front of her committee, And he said, I'll never forget. And he said, I saw her on TV recently. This is George Bush Sr.
Right.
Wow, she looked great. Did she lose weight? He says. And I said, well, yeah. And he said, really? She looked beautiful. And then I said to him, well, we all think Barbra is great.
Implying, she's way better than her husband, right?
That was the implication, all right.
Right. You mentioned to me just a minute ago that you actually spent time in Boston. You came here to go to school at BU, right?
Yeah, I did. And then I worked up there after I graduated, lived with my boyfriend, and I worked for Mayor Kevin White.
Right. For how long?
It was 2 years before I came back to New York. You know.
Right. And do you want to talk about your own work in more recent years, carrying on your mother's legacy?
Yeah, I had a consulting firm, and I taught at Barnard and Columbia, Barnard College in Columbia, women in leadership, community building, economic development, all sorts of courses for 19 years. At the same time as I started the legacy organization, which is the Bella Abzug Leadership Institute, which trains low-income girls in leadership, debate, empowerment skills who attend public schools in the 5 boroughs of New York and the tri-state area. We train about 4,000 kids. It's called BALI for short, BALI, Bella Abzug Leadership Institute. And it is her legacy organization. I created it 3 years after she died, 3 or 4. And I wanted on her dynamics, her strategies, her ability to be a leader the way she was, and my own work into this organization. And I think we've done it quite successfully. And we train a lot of kids who've gone on to be doing great things in the professions. And 2 years ago, we started taking a few boys, even though it's 99% program.
Right. I see a few new viewers coming in, so I'll say it again. If you want to ask Liz a question about her mom or the making of this documentary or anything at all, just type it in the chat and we will do our best to pose it to Liz. I have a handful of other questions for you in the meantime that I have plenty of questions for you. That's what I do. You guys pulled out all the stops. You pulled out every, sort of like connection you had to get them all into this film, right? Some of these women, I'm sure were in your life, in your family's life.
Many of them.
Height, I mean, Gloria or, Marlo Thomas or whoever.
Like my aunts. Those people like my aunts. Barbara, I knew when she was 30s. I was campaigning with her and Bella on the bus. I mean, on the truck all the way down Broadway. Gloria, Marlo Thomas, Shirley MacLaine, they're very much in my life. Lily, personally in my life. And that's how I got the interviews. I mean, I wrote them and I said, we're doing this, and would you be interviewed?
Yeah.
And they said, yes, of course, because I had the relationships, and even Charlie Rangel, David Dinkins, even Maxine Waters. And that's how this has this richness, because they all gave their perspectives of knowing and being close to Bella, both politically and personally.
Right. All these like sort of showbiz women who are in the film were like you said, like aunts for you. But were you in awe or like, oh my God, I can't believe like Barbra Streisand is in my life or whatever?
I mean, I was a young woman. I mean, I was in awe of her, but she was also a young woman. I mean, Lily Tomlin, we admired her, Marlo, all these, and Phil Donahue. Of course, at first I was in awe, but then when you get to, work with them a bit and know them a bit, I started to like calm that down, because we were really working, for a goal.
They're friends. They're friends of the family, not necessarily stars, or whatever. Yeah. Speaking of stardom, though, and obviously your mom had it. There was a moment in the film where, like, she became this pop culture phenomenon. Very much of New York, representing New York City, and she's with Gilda Radner on Saturday Night Live, and she's on the cover of Rolling Stone, which I don't remember ever seeing that issue, but those moments must have felt a little bit to you and Eve like, oh wow, geez, like mom's, she's not just a politician anymore. She's crossing over into the pop culture world.
Yeah, absolutely. That Rolling Stone cover was Andy Warhol did 3 triptych painting
that makes
portraits
sense, of
of Bella,
course.
and
Yeah.
that's what was on the cover.
Yeah.
So it was sort of her connection in a host of fields. I mean, he was a big admirer, and yeah, we felt like, oh my God, this is a phenom. She's becoming a phenomenon, and how is this happening to our mother? Well, I knew how it was happening because she was really smart. She was very personable. She was very dynamic, and she connected with people, which is what we need in leaders all the time to this day.
Right. So I'm going to get to that in 1 second. We have a watcher named @KimmyJeans. There it is. And Kimmy just says it's an incredible film. So that's great. Kimmy, if you have a question, you're more than welcome to ask it, but happy to have you contribute. So you just sort of brought us into the present day, Liz, and obviously I want to ask a little bit about that. Who would your mother have admired politically were she living now?
She would have liked Obama, like obviously Hillary. I mean, they knew each other, not so much Obama, but Hillary did. That's how I got Hillary into the film.
Yep.
I think she would have gotten a big kick out of Jasmine Crockett, truthfully, because she's smart and she's out there. She puts it together and she knows how to legislate. And my mother, one thing about her, in addition to everything in her intelligence and her personality, was that she knew how to legislate. She knew parliamentary procedure. She knew how to put things together and still keep her personality and her charm, and that's how she was able to legislate a lot there at that time with men from the South. There were 12 women in the Congress at the time she was in there, first elected. No women in the Senate, United States Senate, which she ran for. No woman New York City mayor, which she ran for. Of course, we still haven't had a New York City mayor as a woman.
Right.
So, she had the ability, and I teach leadership, so I know about this. I've been teaching it for years, is that she has the characteristics of leadership that people connect to. And it's honesty, it's directness, but it's personality, it's looking in a person's eyes, it's compassion, it's empathy, it's courage, and it's the ability to, get people excited. And Obama, certainly did that. I worked with him. I was one of the delegate. I advised him when he was president the first term. And Hillary learned how to definitely, do that herself over the years even more. And so, she was one of the first in modern history that knew how to put that together.
I think what I'm hearing you say is that, the film obviously goes into the sort of political losses and times when your mom was not quite so successful. Obviously, you mentioned the Senate race and then running for mayor, neither of which turned out the way she wanted it to. But I think what I'm hearing you saying is that she knew of herself that she was more of a leader even than a politician, because a lot of people would have put their tails between their legs after losing in quick succession the Senate race and the mayor's race and said, okay, public doesn't want me anymore. I guess I'll go away for a while. And she didn't do that at all. She went and, was the figurehead at the NOW conference, right? For right away.
No,
right?
that was a difference. That wasn't a NOW conference. That was the first modern conference in history of women. 30,000 women attended that in Houston, and she was the chair of that, appointed by Carter. But to answer the question, she always said to me, politicians run for office. I mean, if you lose, you get back up on the horse and you run again. She lost that Senate race by 1/4 percentage point.
Right.
And the only reason why she lost that is that 2 men who had 11% and 9% stayed in the race. If either of them had gotten out, Ramsey Clark or Paul O'Dwyer, she would have
votes from her. Right.
Yeah, she would have beaten Moynihan decisively.
Right. So do you feel like she felt like, I mean, yes, she did say, I'm a politician. That's what you do. You run for office. But she clearly also thought of herself as knew she was a leader, right?
Yeah, yeah, and she loved doing the work. She enjoyed, the ability to connect, the attention for sure. I mean, every politician who, sort of has built a following or has run for different offices, most really enjoy it. Nobody loves the campaigning, but actually Bella liked the campaigning a lot, and so it wasn't, it was a very rough time because she ran for re-election for Congress 3 times. Then she resigned to run for the United States Senate. She lose by a quarter percentage point. Then in the very next year, she runs for mayor of New York City,
Right.
8 men and her. And then after that, Congress a few times after. So in a succession of many elections, campaigns, one after the other, she even tired her staff out. You see that, one of them was telling that story in the film.
Right.
I mean, she tired us all out. And I worked
Right.
in every one of her campaigns, by the way.
Your mom was, you'd be hard pressed to pick another person who was the quintessential New Yorker in the 70s and 80s besides your mom, other than the guy who's currently president. And I'm sure that they knew each other. Do you have any stories to tell about?
Yeah. My mother, I was a big tennis player, and my mother loved tennis as a young woman. And we went to the US Open, Forest Hills, when it was smaller, not the mega stadium.
Yeah.
And we were in a box that someone gave to my mother, and next to us was Donald Trump in the next, right there. And I said to my mother, look at his suits. They're so cheap. They're like, and she said, you're right. They're disgusting, and we're looking at him and, how could this guy wear these kind of cheap looking clothing? And then you have to realize that Trump, we all knew him in New York. My partner was a very well-known real estate lawyer here in New York, and she had many cases, many deals where he was on the other side. But we all knew that it wasn't his money. It was, Chinese money, Japanese money who funded his projects. So we all were familiar with this guy. And, there's an empty suit in a lot of, in many ways. We knew that way back.
Yeah. I mean, New York, was the first to reject him, basically.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
So that maybe, so we're kind of at time. So I think maybe I'm going to, you talked about the suits. So I think I'm going to ask you one other sartorial question.
Okay.
I can't let it go with, I mean, I'm sure you probably are sick and tired of hearing people. I know your mother was sick and tired of hearing about the hats, but I want to know if you and Eve ever felt compelled to throw on a hat just to sort of, honor your mom.
I have, and my sister has, and I have more than probably she has. Do you know how she started wearing hats? I don't know if you picked that up.
I don't remember.
All right, quickly, it is that she was a young lawyer. She went on one of her first cases, worked for a small firm. She went to represent, to go to the firm to represent a client. She goes to the receptionist and she says, hi, I'm Bella Abzug. I'm here from Kramer and Kramer, whatever. And the receptionist says, sit down. Okay, sit down. And so she's sitting there for 5, 10, 15. Yeah. Finally, it's 15 minutes. She goes back to the receptionist and she says to the receptionist, my name is Bella Abzug and I'm from this firm. And the receptionist says, we're waiting for the lawyer. And my mother said, but I am the lawyer. So she went home and told my dad. And my dad, at that time, Eleanor Roosevelt and other distinguished women wore hats and gloves. And my mother started to try it. He said, why don't you wear a hat? Why don't you wear gloves? And she liked the way she looked at it. And she took off the and she took off the gloves, but she kept the hat because she liked it and she enjoyed it.
Is there some kind of do you have some kind of like a shrine to your mom's hat somewhere? You do, right?
Well, we gave, after she died, I gave a lot of her hats to various good friends of hers.
Yeah.
There was one there still is in the New York City Museum.
Oh, I was just going to say, I know the City Museum in New York has.
Yeah, it does. And we have some of them still. And we've used some for fundraisers sometimes, as she did.
Yeah, that's
so
great.
There's still some here, with me and my sister, but most of them have been dispersed all a lot of different places. And Shirley MacLaine, who was very, very close to her and is very close to me, she wanted her hat rack, her tree, her hat tree.
All right.
And so we gave that to her. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much for talking to us, Liz. Again, wish we could have done it for Women's History Month, but you know what? as we sometimes say, it should be Women's History Month every month, so we don't have
That's
to
right.
just make it 1 month, right?
Right.
So, really quickly, so now that PBS, the American Masters stream, it has gone quiet. Where can folks next look for the
First
film?
of all, it's on it'll be on Passport.
Passport. You can pay to join
it'll be-
PBS's
and
Passport program, right?
That's right. And we filmed it. The director, he's taken it to several film festivals. I filmed it just last week. I mean, screened it.
Yeah.
It's been screened in different parts of the country at different film festivals. So it's pretty out there and will continue to be in various forum and venues, you know, and when it is, I mean, I was asked to go down to Palm Springs and show it there. So, local papers will report on it, and I think that, it's a whole other issue about making a deal with Netflix and some of the streaming companies, but it's a whole other story. We don't have time for it another time.
That's a whole other episode for sure.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to make your acquaintance and to help spread the good word about your film and your mom's work. So thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
We'll take a brief moment to once again thank our sponsor, the Ford Hall Forum, and we'll see you next month in the Watch Club.